Hello everyone and welcome to Uncharted Parenting, a podcast brought to you by Encounter Youth. Parenting is one wild adventure. It's full of twists, turns, and plenty of uncharted territory. Don't worry, you're not navigating it alone. We're here with you. Each episode here on the pod, we dive into real conversations, expert insights from some amazing professionals from various fields, and honest stories to help you find your way in this parenting journey. I'm your host, Louis, the Education and Parent Coordinator at Encounter Youth. Before joining the team here, I enjoyed 9 years serving as a police officer in the South Australian Police. But most importantly, I'm the proud dad of 2 boys. Welcome to Uncharted Parenting because, let's be honest, no one really has a map for this journey. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of Uncharted Parenting. It's always great to have special guests on the show, but it's also even better to have some of our own people from Encounter Youth on the show as well. And I actually find myself, I'm very lucky. I come to work every day and I get to work with some of the best people that I know going around. And it is an absolute blessing to come to work today. And actually, we're interviewing one of Encounter Youth's education team. And so welcome, Zoe O'Donovan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's okay. So it's great to finally have you on the podcast. And look, to kick things off, I'd really love for our listeners to get to know who you are and what you do for Encounter Youth. So do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your role? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment I am the Education and Analytics Coordinator. So I am one of the educators as you are going out in schools talking to young people about alcohol and drugs, but also their parents and staff communities. I also have a number of different bits that fit into my role too, including our data and analytics, where we have dynamic reporting. We have tailored schools program going on as well, where we send out surveys to our young people and get their input on their intentions or thoughts or attitudes around alcohol and drugs. And we can then use that to help inform our programs as we go out to students and making sure it's relevant to them, but also then helping with the pre and post survey to collect that data and look at how our program is actually helping educate them and what their understanding around alcohol and drugs is and how it changes through the program. So that's probably the main things.
Yeah, I often find myself thinking, I would not like Zoe's job because data and analytics is not my forte. So I'm definitely very thankful for the work that you do as part of our education team. But obviously, Zoe, there's probably some time before you joined Encounter Youth and got into this role. But do you mind telling us a little bit about what your journey was prior to working for Encounter Youth?
Yeah, so I did human movement and psychology as a double degree at uni. So health professionals and education is human movement side, and then counselling and interpersonal skills is the psychological science side. And I originally got into that because I was a sporty teenager coming out of school and I thought human movement just sounded interesting to me.
Fair enough.
And they had the option to do a double degree. So I thought, why not smash out 2 degrees in 4 years? But then as I got into it a little bit more and started to do more of the psychological science courses and counselling courses and learning more about how people work, I found people really interesting.
Yeah.
How we socialise with other people, how we connect with other people, I found both interesting and really important. I believe that we're definitely designed to be social beings and support each other through our connections. And so the more I learned about that, the more I shifted from the idea of maybe being a kind of health teacher and kind of shifted towards maybe even looking at sports psychology. I found it really interesting how well connected the mind and body are. And although, that was a big thing that I came away with was it seemed like common sense to me how connected the mind and body are and how they interact with each other. However, for a lot of other people, this whole idea of mental health, well-being, that holistic approach was really new. There was still a bit of hesitation around it, or a bit of, thinking that it's kind of, something that isn't actually based in science, but there's a lot to back that connection there.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We've come a long way in terms of understanding mental well-being, mental resilience. It's something that I remember, interesting fact for the listeners, Zoe and I actually went to the same school, a few years apart. We went to the same school, but I remember actually going through school and wasn't really spoken about at school at all about mental resilience, mental well-being. So it's great to hear that, your studies looked into that a little bit more, and you obviously enjoyed it quite a lot.
Yeah. And I actually did end up being able to use both kind of sides, so the physical health aspect from my human movement and the psychological science part from that part in my next role, which was a wellbeing facilitator.
Yeah.
So I, in that role, was going out to different companies, mainly in the kind of business corporate sector, working with leadership, because culture kind of trickles down from the top oftentimes, but also with schools and other areas as well. And so we were working with leadership to help them look after their well-being. And now well-being is that broad kind of banner that looks after, psychosocial well-being, your emotional, your physical health. We didn't touch on financial, but that's definitely important in there too. Because if they're looking after themselves well, if they're managing themselves both physically and mentally and emotionally and socially, then that comes across in their relationships, especially if they are managing other people. And so building a psychologically safe environment in the business and the way that they led the people that they worked with, it was really important. So that's what I did there. Yeah. But I do have a history of volunteering with young people, and I really was excited when an opportunity came up at Encounter Youth where it was an opportunity to work directly with young people. I knew that teaching was no longer something that I wanted to do full time, but this was an opportunity to be involved and connecting with young people on, in a way that I saw as very beneficial to themselves and their health and their future. So, yeah.
Yeah, you certainly did an excellent job in that as part of the education team here. So thanks for taking us through your journey. So thank you for that. And today, Zoe, we really want to unpack for parents and for caregivers this term harm minimisation. So it's often a buzzword that's out there, but what does that actually mean? But what does actually a harm minimisation approach to alcohol and other drug education actually look like? And we often talk about our program here at Encounter Youth being a holistic one, an evidence-based approach. And can you explain maybe for the listeners what a few of those terms actually mean and how we sort of implement that here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess harm minimisation is an overarching idea, approach. There's a few contributing factors to it being that, and we definitely try to take that overarching philosophy here at Encounter Youth in the way that we educate our young people. And it is a holistic approach. We, as you know, like to talk to our young people and students from year 7 to year 12, but we also really try to engage with parents. This is part of the podcast that you are really, and you are really passionate about connecting with parents, because you definitely see the power in that and the power that they have, connecting with their young people, but also with staff. We want the holistic approach, so it's not just one and done. It's not just in one area. So harm minimisation, it sometimes is referred to as having multiple pillars. So they would be supply reduction, demand reduction, and harm reduction.
Okay.
They are really intertwined. So with the way that we educate, taking a harm minimisation approach, we are by default reducing our demand, because we've got young people who are more educated, more wanting to look after themselves, their health, their well-being, and that sort of thing. There's a reduction in harm, there's a reduction in supply, and therefore reduction in demand, reduction in supply, reduction in harm. Mm-hmm. And tied into all of that is legislation and all of that as well, which as we learn more about something, then there are changes to law, and that all comes into it. But harm minimisation is basically the approach where we accept that some people in society will inevitably use drugs in some way, shape or form, whether that be natural remedies, whether that be medicinal, whether that be recreational. If we look in history, to get us through the morning, even those little things. When we think about drugs, we're probably all kind of wired that way, that we think about those, hard or party drugs, which we don't like to use those terms.
The fear factor sort of drugs.
But really drugs are on a spectrum. So taking the approach that drugs are on a spectrum, drug use is on a spectrum. So there are a number of harms associated with not only the types of drugs, but also patterns of use. And we really want to kind of take a combination approach to then reduce the harm. So it's not getting people to completely stop using drugs, full stop, end of story, black and white.
Yeah.
It's about reducing the harm and what that use looks like or what that drug looks like. And from our approach, we try to do that from a larger scale, which obviously has its, faults and limitations. But that's the kind of approach that we try and take here.
Yeah, I often find one of the things that I say to young people when I go into a school is, I often stand at the front and say, I'm not up here to tell you what to do. That's not really my job, but I'm here to give you the information that we have that's available to us, but that we want to share with you, so you can make choices that are right for you and right for your health and well-being. So you mentioned a couple of things in there, Zoe, and one of the things that is you mentioned this evidence-based approach, and often people are like, oh, but scare tactics work, or I don't really want to talk about it, so let's sweep it under the rug. There's often other approaches to those sorts of tough conversations about alcohol, other drugs, consent, or now online safety and cyberbullying. That's all sort of coming into it. But why is an evidence-based approach probably the best way to go about it? What do you?
Yeah, so a lot of those kind of approaches that you mentioned, so scare tactics in particular, they have scare tactics and emotional responses do have a kind of pull on the heartstrings. It might be really obvious that, the education there is to stop people from using or to scare people from using. And what we find there is that it doesn't work for young people because of the way that they think about risk. And it's often talking about the extremes of where something went really, really wrong. And for young people, if that doesn't line up with their experience, then they disregard it. So there are other approaches too, but the difference with harm minimisation is that we take into account the way that young people think about risk. We come in with that approach that you just mentioned, that we're not there to tell them what to do. And we know that there is an outcome we're trying to get. We're trying to get them more educated so that they are less likely to use, but because they choose not to because they know the harms, not because they're told just not to do it. Young people are curious, and that is a natural part of where they're at. So that's not something we're scared of. But an evidence-based approach is, a combination then of using knowledge, using tools that we've got, but not over-educating, educating at a pace that's appropriate for their age. Being aware of where young people are at, combination then of things, including the holistic approach, including staff and parents, including the fact that we are more than happy to be a repeat of this information. Sometimes I get young people coming up and saying like, I've heard of all this before. That is great. Like, I hope you keep hearing about this conversation because we are there to be a part of a holistic approach, a part of an evidence-based approach. There is only so much we can do in 75 minutes. We can't build rapport and relationship with those young people. So it is the best with what we can do with that time frame, for sure.
Yeah, it is always a difficult sort of balance to find, I think, and I certainly find that as well. But you mentioned something in there as well, Zoe, about meeting young people where they're at, and sort of it's really interesting that, we have the opportunity to survey students before we go into a school and post that as well. And I can honestly say that Zoe's got a nickname here at work. She is the data queen. And so she really integrates that into our education program. And so data really drives a lot of what we do here in Encounter Youth and how we inform young people on up to date with trends and what's going on for them, decisions that they're choosing to make. Can you maybe talk us through how the data that we collect and obviously external surveys as well that are completed, how do we implement those into our program, and how do we ensure that maybe they stay relevant for young people as well?
Yeah. So the way that we do our program is we send out pre-seminar surveys to teachers to forward on to students before we go. In the weeks leading up to it. And then we then follow up with a post survey. So post seminar, we send that out again to teachers to pass on to the students. And what we can start to know is the changes in understanding around intention of use. Now, we don't ask about actual use. There are other studies that do that, and we use those as well to inform us on what young people are choosing.
Yeah.
And it's really important as well because of the way that perceptions play a really big part in young people's understandings of things like alcohol and drugs, and therefore influence their choices. So if their perception is that most young people are drinking, most people around their age are drinking and taking drugs, unless that perception is changed, then they're going to see that as normal. So we come in with this understanding of what young people's intentions are, of what their broad understanding of alcohol and drugs are. We then use that with a combination of some other surveys, namely the big two that we use are from the National Household Survey and Drug Survey and the Australian Secondary Students Alcohol and Drug Survey. And they are some big surveys that are done across Australia separately. So secondary students, obviously 12 to 17, and then household surveys is that broader age group up into adults. And this helps inform us so that we know where young people are sitting. We can encourage them in the positive choices that they're making. We share these statistics with young people to encourage them to be a part of the majority, which is actually that they're not choosing to use alcohol or other drugs, and encouraging them in that. And that might be a surprise to a lot of them. It might even be a surprise to some parents listening today, because what we see on the media especially is often very negative, and it is often about when things go wrong, when other drugs are used, when, party celebrations are a little bit crazy. We don't hear about all of these positive messages about young people making healthy choices. So that's why we try to use a mix of surveys and data to get an idea of where young people are at and meet them there, and making sure that it's relevant information for them to hear.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about media. Just then, we're doing some sort of form of media right now, but it's interesting how sometimes those negative, attention-grabbing headlines are used to portray young people to the community and to society. Whereas what we know from the evidence that we present is that actually a lot of them are making some really great choices, which is maybe even what parents haven't heard either. A lot of them are actually making some really great, positive, healthy choices, but.
For sure.
Something you mentioned a while ago, Zoe, was this spectrum or continuum that drug use happens on. Do you mind? I often find it sometimes hard to understand that and how that works. So can you maybe take us through that a little?
Yeah. So absolutely. For those listening at home without something in front of you, imagine a continuum. So we've got a line where there are arrows at both ends. So it's not a line where there is a beginning and an end. Yeah. It's a continuum. And this is going to look different for individuals. It's going to look different for groups of people and different cultures. On the one side, on the left-hand side, we have got beneficial use. So this is where we say that drug use actually can often play a really beneficial part in a lot of situations. So this is where there is positive health outcomes, positive social outcomes, spiritual impacts, medications that can be life-saving. Tea and coffee. This is a fun one when we talk to year sevens. I'm sure you've had this too. Or you can get some very young groups of year sevens that are hearing that caffeine is a drug, and you've got to kind of calm them down that no, just because mum and dad have 2 coffees a day doesn't make them an addict.
Doesn't make them an addict. Yeah, that's right.
So we say there is low risk here. It is beneficial use in society. If we move across the right-hand side a little bit more, this is where it becomes, unproblematic. So this is where drug use sits, and there might be, social or recreational use. It may not be beneficial, but it's kind of neither here nor there.
Yep.
And negligible health or social impacts. So, adult can go out, have a great time, be drinking, get home safe. So kind of fits in the middle there. If we continue to move on the right-hand side, we then enter problematic. So this is where the use of whatever the drug is does become negative consequences for their health, for their relationships. It could be self-medication of a certain drug. It could be the type of the drug, or it could be the harmful administration. So it's not, again, just about the drug. It's about the way that it's being used and if there is harm because of it. Then if we continue past that point, this is where we reach dependence. So we use dependence as kind of a better word for addiction. But this is where we find that people have habitual use, compulsive use. It continues even if an individual is aware of those harms that we've just mentioned. So harms to their health or harms to their relationships, harms to their commitments, to work or school or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of a loss of control here. So they might be aware of the negative impacts, but they really, really struggle to stop.
Yeah.
So basically, the harm minimization philosophy then is not to get people from the right-hand side straight across to the left-hand side where, not to get them to stop using, not to get them completely in the beneficial realm of drug use, but it's just to move them slightly to the left.
Yep.
So it might be moving someone from the dependent side to problematic.
Yep.
It might be, even better if we can move them from dependence to unproblematic.
Yeah.
It's just moving wherever a person or group of people are down the line where it becomes more and more beneficial. And that might be a slow process. That might be where GPs or other therapies or other programs come into play to help people move along that line. But when it comes to what we're talking about, we're really educating, hopefully, to be preventative so that it doesn't get to that extreme, but also encouraging young people that they've got a choice and their choices have an impact on their health, on their relationships, and they can actually move themselves a little bit further to the left.
I wish I could explain it half as good as what you so no, thank you for taking us through that. So we know that obviously this happens on this spectrum, and so down the left-hand side we've got therapeutic benefits and things like that, and down the other end we have the dependence. And often what I find fascinating, Zoe, is when we go into schools and we put that graphic up on the screen of what young people believe is the most harmful or the drug of most concern.
Yes. Yeah.
And we put up those drugs like ice and heroin and cannabis, and most of the hands in the room will go up for those, those fear factor sort of drugs. But more often than not, the reality is that the drug of most concern is actually one that they've probably actually become familiar with or seen quite regularly over time. So we're actually looking at alcohol here. And so why is alcohol actually considered the drug of most concern, and why do we say that to young people?
It's interesting that slide. I always find it interesting because no matter, so that's in our Year 10 seminar, as you're aware. And when we present that or where we present that, we get different hands for different drugs as to which one they think is the drug of concern. And especially if there's been, a big article in the media lately, if there's been a festival and young people have been using a certain drug and something's gone wrong, hands go up. But you're right, alcohol is the drug of most concern. And it is the drug of most concern not only for young people, but for adults in Australia. It actually contributes to more harm than illicit drugs combined. And there's two kind of angles here. One of that is because of alcohol relating to the number of deaths caused per year in Australia. So alcohol caused about just under 2,000 deaths in Australia in 2022. Now, if we compared to a couple of other drugs, so heroin, for example, caused about 500 deaths in 2022, amphetamines, including meth and ice, being a little bit more than this, about 560 deaths Australia-wide.
Okay. So
we're quadrupling that for alcohol.
It's quite significant, really.
It is significant. And this, and if that doesn't sound significant enough, when we then include deaths that happen in Australia where alcohol was involved or related, this then doubles. So alcohol-related deaths, about 5,000 in 2022. So there is real concern because of risks, harms, both health-related, behaviour-related situations people find themselves in, or the impacts on other people there as well. So deaths is one of the kind of angles.
Yep.
The other angle is hospitalizations. So alcohol contributed to about 80,000 hospitalizations. So about roughly 2 out of 3 hospitalizations are due to alcohol.
Wow.
And I recently actually saw a stat as well, which I think RAA posted, but about the wet weather we had recently, and they said that 51% of wet weather-related accidents on the roads actually was because alcohol or another drug was contributing factor. So there are a lot of different reasons why, and we get a little bit of pushback because those other drugs might seem riskier, seem more harmful, but in the reality, young people in particular, but for adults too, most are not choosing to use these illegal drugs. Alcohol is a legal drug for those over 18, and then that's excluding secondary supply laws, which is obviously legal too.
Yep.
So there is considerable risk of harm for alcohol. The drug, one of the drugs that Australians certainly like to have around, especially for celebration cultures. So there is considerable risk of harm there.
Yeah, I was just about to say it is, alcohol is that, that drug that is so deeply embedded into our Australian culture, isn't it? It's like you just said, it features in so many of our celebrations, Christmases, birthdays, even celebrating a local footy win or something like that. It's quite embedded into our culture, and beyond that as well, it's advertised everywhere. Like we see ads on TV, on radio about go to Dan Murphy's, BWS, and all these sort of places, and it's hard to really escape.
It is,
even for a young person growing up, but even for adults as well. It's hard to escape advertising when it comes to those sorts of products. And with that in mind, I know there's some really effective protective practices or strategies that parents and caregivers can probably put into place. Can you maybe walk us through some of those?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just start with the alcohol guidelines, actually.
Yep.
So fun fact, there are alcohol guidelines.
Yeah, thank you.
You may not have heard of them before if you're listening. We aren't surprised by that. So every now and again, they come up with new recommendations as to a few things, including alcohol. This is from the National Health and Medical Research Council.
Yep.
The recommendations are that someone doesn't drink any more than 4 standard drinks in a day to reduce risk of injury or accident.
Yep.
And no more than 10 standard drinks in a week to reduce risk like diseases like cancer. Now, this is the recommendation for adults first and foremost.
Yep.
Recommendation for young people, of course, then is that anyone under the age of 18 doesn't drink alcohol. That's the recommendation. So that's a good starting point to be aware of. Maybe some adults are listening and going, oh, that's interesting, even from an adult perspective, let alone our young people.
Yeah.
But this is where it is good to kind of know where recommendations are, where risks lie, and where risks and protective factors lie. Mm-hmm. Now, parents are in a really great position where they have an influence. They have an influence on their young people. So we're certainly not here to tell people how to parent. I myself am not a parent, so I'm definitely not going down that angle. Parents know their young people the best way possible. They your relationship with your young person, so how this fits for you. But there are some risk factors that do come up again and again through research. And so let's work off that. So a couple of risk factors: parental drinking or favourable attitudes to alcohol.
Yep.
So our young people are like sponges. And as you talked to Lael Stone and how she had that, what's the...
Oh, they can't be what they can't see.
Yeah, they can't be what they can't see.
Yeah.
100%. So what they see is what they assume might be normal or expected, and they soak this up and then kind of use that as their attitudes, their choices and behaviours. So parental drinking or favourable attitudes. Parental supply of alcohol and drugs. And you talked to Andrew about this, that parental supply is actually the number one reason why young people have access to alcohol, or more recently anyway.
Almost half, actually, yes.
Yeah.
47% from memory,
47%, yeah. So that's a risk factor in and of itself. Accessibility of alcohol or other drugs in the household, the community, whatever that looks like, and perceptions of use or actual peer and adult use of alcohol and drugs. So perceptions are really important, especially at a young age. Now, to combat that, it's not all doom and gloom. If you're sitting and listening and going, oh, goodness, we've done a few of those and thought it's, a good thing. There is often, good intention from parents, right? They want to introduce it at a safe place where there's parental supervision, and they might introduce it earlier from that angle. But we do know that it is a risk factor. So on the other side, influential positive factors are acceptance of non-use. So literally just the simplicity of saying no to an alcoholic drink in an environment where it might be an assumption that adults are drinking alcohol. So something like a celebration environment or those barbecues or catch-ups. Just simply saying no to an alcoholic drink when you could have one holds power, and young people see that. They see that then as an option and as a normal option. Alcohol-specific rules with a focus on health and well-being. So we've just heard about guidelines there.
Yep.
They are there for a reason. They've done the research in not only injury and accident, but longer-term health, looking after a person's well-being, and things like cancers, that they are protective factors. So having rules in your household, although no young person really likes rules, in a sense they kind of do. Yeah. They like to know where the line is. They might push that boundary. They might try and get close to it, but they do like to know where that line is. What's even better is involving them in those conversations and explaining the health or well-being reason why. So not just it's a rule because I'm putting a rule in place, but we're going to implement this rule in our house because we actually really, value our family. We want to look after our family's health, and we know that this can be a risk factor. So we would like to implement this rule. Modelling healthy ways to cope with general life stress. So if your default is to get home from a big day at work, stressful day at work, challenging day at work, and go straight to the fridge.
Straight to the fridge, yeah.
Which I'm not judging you there.
Yeah.
But the way that might be modelled in front of our young people is where, we actually have an influence. So coming up with other, or at least talking about other ways to cope with stress and promoting those to combat the other use.
Yeah.
And healthy relationships between parents, young people and their peers. So relationships in and of itself, having a good solid foundation of relationship in and of itself is a positive factor. So we've actually seen and tracked through our surveys over, we've been doing it for a number of years now, but the more recent data from 2024, we surveyed about 6,000 young students from year 9 to 12, and we asked them the quality of their relationship with their important relationships, so parents, peers, and staff.
Yep.
Now, some good news here. I'm sure most of us wouldn't be surprised that their peers are their most important, or one of the relationships where they highly rate it as good or excellent.
It's almost that shift, isn't it? When they go from primary school into high school, they start to, young people start to put more emphasis on what their friends are actually thinking.
Yeah. But that's, again, a good thing.
It's a total normal thing.
Totally normal, totally a good thing. That in and of itself actually as well is a protective factor. So don't be scared off by peer relationships and that you've been booted. But parents are then the second greatest relationship for young people. Yeah. So although they rate their relationships with their friends or peers as the highest rated at 91%, they rated their relationships with their parents as good or excellent, 90%. Yeah. So very closely linked behind. And so parents have more of an influence than they may even realise, especially around choices like alcohol and other drugs. And these relationships lower the rate of young people choosing to drink and also delay their first alcoholic drink until they're that little bit older. It's a protective factor for longevity. So they're waiting until they're that little bit older to be choosing to use alcohol in particular. And although this does drop off around year 12, we kind of don't see a real issue with that, considering year 12, a lot of people actually turn 18. Yeah. They are then adults. They are legally able to drink and all of that sort of thing. So it's the lead up to that. So from year 9 to 12, it's a protective factor having a really good relationship with your young person, and that predicts lower and later alcohol use. So it delays it. It's better for them now, but also for the future too.
So basically the evidence is telling us that parents have this massive influence in the way that young people make their decisions, essentially.
Yeah, and not to be scared by that either. Conversations are really, really important. If you don't have all the information, not being scared by that either. Like, there is so much power and trust being built when you say words like, hey, I'm not sure, let me look into it and get back to you. Or I'm not actually sure, let's look into it together. Yep. Like, parents have a lot going on in their worlds, a lot on their plate. Yep. It's definitely not an expectation that you know everything. But those conversations are really important.
Yeah. I think the word that's probably used a lot now is connection, like having that connection with your young person when it comes to those sorts of topics, and having those conversations is probably very, very important. Zoe, you've been extremely generous with your time today. So I thank you for that. But
No worries.
there's probably a lot of parents and caregivers maybe listening today that would be really curious about what young people actually are choosing. So it would be remiss of me not to ask the data queen to share some data with us. So it wouldn't be right for me to wrap up without asking you that. So what actually are young people choosing when it comes to things like alcohol and things like other drugs as well?
Let's do it. Now, we've said the stats word, we've said data.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you're thinking, no, stats and data, too much for me, numbers just don't work well with me. No, we're not looking at pretty graphs at the moment. I want to encourage you to listen because it's actually where we find a lot of positive messages. It's really helpful to combat those perceptions, not only for young people, this is why we tell young people, but also for our perceptions of the way that we approach young people, and we might have assumptions around what they're choosing or doing. So there's a lot of positivity in here. So firstly, which I hinted at with the delayed use of alcohol, this comes from the National Household Drug Survey. Now, the most recent for that is 2019.
Yep.
So firstly, the average age of young person's full first alcoholic drink has increased over time from an average of 14.4 years old in 1998 to about 16.2 in 2019. And we're looking at about 16 and a half years old now.
Yeah.
Now, that's really positive because that's only a year and a half away from the legal age of drinking.
Yep.
So if that's the average age that someone has their first full alcoholic drink and it has pushed back over 2 years, is really, really positive. And that's, testament to education, but also to those influential relationships.
Yep.
The second thing that we'll look at is the ASARD survey. So that's the Australian Secondary Student Alcohol and Drug Survey. It is actually the largest national longitudinal study of substance use in Australia.
Yep.
Now, the most recent was 2022-2023, and it was the 13th in the series. So they aimed to do it every 3 years, and they were successful up until COVID-19 pandemic.
Something called COVID, yep.
Remember that?
Yeah.
So there was a bit of gap in the last one, but this has meant that we've been able to pick up on patterns. And that's really powerful. We've seen a shift, although alcohol is a big part of celebration culture, we've seen a shift for young people in their choices. Now, this data was actually cleaned up and kind of weighted to best represent Australians or young Australians across Australia. So in terms of gender, distribution of age, metro and regional schools and that sort of thing, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. When broken down into their self-categorisations, most young people in both age groups, from 12 to 15-year-olds and 16 to 17-year-olds, most young people actually sat in the non-drinker category. Wow. So for 12 to 15-year-olds, this sat at 83%, which is a solid majority. Yeah. And then 16 to 17-year-olds, 51%. Now, this, sneaks above that halfway point.
Yep.
But again, really positive because this is kind of what we expect as people get closer to the legal age of drinking. They're going to, less are going to be non-drinkers and more are going to be drinkers.
Yep.
So then those other categories, those drinker categories, the three other categories we have are occasional drinker, party drinker, and other. So the second largest category is occasional drinker.
Yeah. Again,
really positive. Yeah. So this increases from 11% for 12 to 15-year-olds to 24% for our 16 to 17-year-olds. But this is the second largest group. Those who are choosing to drink are actually not choosing to drink often. Then we have our party drinker category. Now that increases from 4% for our 12 to 15-year-olds to about 19% for our 16 to 17-year-olds. And we do raise a bit of concern here because of the amount they're drinking and the situations they're finding themselves in. They are having what would be considered, I guess, a risky amount of alcohol if we're looking back to those alcohol guidelines and the recommendation being no more than 4 standard drinks. Yeah. And again, that's for adults.
Yeah.
These young people are, so the party drinkers are. And they are having likely more than that, likely about 7 or 8 standard drinks at a party or an event. And that does mean that increased risk of injury or accident due to alcohol increases to about 5 times. Okay. So we raise concern for them.
Yep.
But besides that, looking back, there's actually a really positive message that more young people are choosing not to drink. This has changed over the years. more young people are choosing to delay their first alcoholic drink until they're a little bit older. And we've seen it in all age groups. So the 12 to 15-year-olds, our 16 to 17-year-olds, and even looking forward into our 18 to 24-year-old category who are, now legal adults able to go out and buy alcohol. The most recent study from the household survey actually says that while about 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds do drink at least once a week, 70% of them actually drink much less frequently, about once a month or even less than that. So again, we see that as positive. Yeah, we see that as positive even when they're legally able to drink, when it's a part of their, social interactions and there's maybe that layer of expectation. It's really encouraging what young people are choosing and doing for their health. So yeah.
I think parents can probably take some encouragement from that, and that maybe those relationships are contributing to that, and they're having those conversations maybe with their young people earlier, and that's really great to see. So thank you for taking us through that now.
Yeah, no worries.
Zoe, you've been incredibly generous with your time, and you do some amazing work here at Encounter Youth in your analytics, in keeping track of data, keeping track of trends and things like that. And it's incredible what you do. You got a real big heart for young people and sharing your knowledge with them. So keep doing the work that you're doing.
Appreciate it.
And we hope that we can share it far and wide with parents. And thank you for sharing some of your insight with our parent audience today. So thanks for coming on Uncharted Parenting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Zoe. Well, that's it for today's episode of Uncharted Parenting. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. We love to hear from all of our listeners, so if you have any questions that you would like us to answer here on the podcast, we want to hear from you. Send those questions in to us and we will be answering them right here on the pod. Please send them in to podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. That's podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. Uncharted Parenting is now also on YouTube, so head on over and subscribe to our channel at Encounter Youth AU. And remember, wherever you listen to your podcasts, give us a follow, subscribe, send us a review, send in those questions by the bucket load. And remember, there's no map for parenting. You enter uncharted waters every single day, but there is a way forward. You're doing an amazing job, and we're here with you on that journey. We have some more amazing episodes and guests coming your way soon. Until next time, goodbye for now.